Hey guys, Shelby here. We recently got a question about um, armor of the Abassid Caliphate, so just wanted to talk a little bit about it because I am kind of the resident Abassid fanboy. About the Abassids, they were around from like 750 to about 1258. So you're looking at 8th century to 13th century, like mid 13th century. Um, During that time, we saw with the Abassids, they brought in a more multicultural kind of aspect into, at the time, the Islamic world by essentially like they took over from the Umayyads, and the Umayyads had sort of a kind of how you say like a policy that anyone who wasn't Arabic was kind of a second class citizen. While the Abbasids, they focused more on, as long as you were a Muslim, you were good. So with that being said, we saw a lot of influence from other cultures, other regions that were neighboring them, things like that. A lot of Persian influence came in at that time. We saw like the the rise of popularity of the kaftan, which that version was a button-down robe, uh, you know, mid, typically about to your knee or maybe to your mid shin, but no longer than that. Uh, we, as far as the armor goes, though, what we saw was primarily made of four materials. They were typically iron, steel, leather, or just padded textile, like linen. So your linen armor, easiest thing to look at is kind of a padded jackets, things like that. What we would call typically a gambeson, um, padded caftans. Were pretty big, and that was kind of like the standard. Then you also had uh, chainmail. Chainmail was very very big and uh, was used quite often. In that time, they had already started using the four-in-one, typically with alternating rings of riveted, along with uh, alternating rows of riveted and solid rings, um, which would make it cheaper and easier to produce, as well as kind of lightening it a little bit. Um, an interesting thing is we did see some early examples then of uh, the rings being stamped or etched with like Quranic, like verses and things like that, Islamic phrases or the name of Allah, um, kind of stamped into the rivets themselves, or not to the rivets, to the rings. Then after mail, which typically came in the form of either a long like coat, what we might call a hauberk, but we did see actually during that period became more popular to wear a shorter version, like a shirt. Um, though cavalry, which was very very big for the Abbasid Caliphate, they did continue to wear their long ones. We even have a um, a story like there was it was attested that like two champions got into a battle and they had to hike up their skirts, so to speak, because the mail was too long and would get in the way of them fighting on foot. So after mail, we have well, with mail we also had the Jazarant or the Kazagan, and that was a padded gambeson that had mail inside of it. So you would have a layer of textile, typically with a thin layer of linen padding, then a mail, basically coat that went into it, more padding, In some later examples, and I'm not sure if those are necessarily true to the Abassid era, but we also saw that there would be a shorter uh, second layer of mail that just covers like the chest and the upper arms. And then over top of that, there'd be another layer of padding and the outer layer. Um, and so that's what you see in a lot of miniatures when it looks like guys are just running around in typical clothes in the paintings, but they're actually wearing this hidden mail armor essentially. You also saw a lot of lamellar. Lamellar was very, very popular, had been popular for a very long time. It's basically popular throughout the region. You saw both leather versions and iron or steel versions. They were two different styles. Again, it kind of went the same way that mail did, where there was long versions and then there was also just a short, like essentially a cuirass. Those would typically fit on like a cuirass. You'd probably see them strap on the sides, while the coats were typically front closure. And Frank does have a good video where he shows off his armor, so you should check that out. Then, but we also saw leather in that time. Leather lamellar armor was very popular because it was cheap, easy to produce, and good for light troops and mobile cavalry. But yeah, we didn't see very much plate. What plate we did see only really came in the form, and we only see a few examples of it really. Vambraces, sort of proto bazubands. They were tubular, instead of segmented, and mostly they just covered like the mid forearm. We do see in a few murals and from Persia at the time, just a few examples of like the back of the hand being covered with a plate, but that's it. And as far as like greaves go, again, very rarely did we see any kind of metal greaves. There's a few examples, but again, they were more like tubular style or just a plate that fixed to the shin. But mostly they just wore high leather boots, and often they used their other armor to protect their upper legs and their padded armor or their chainmail to protect their upper legs. Then yeah, outside of that, the only real kind of armor that we saw at that time was they would either wear a mail coif, or they might have a helmet, like a steel helmet. There's two types that were kind of popular during the time. One was made out of bands of metal come together to form kind of almost a spherical shape with a little peak that would look to resemble like the dome on a mosque. Or we would see more the traditional conical style helmet. Looks very similar to what we would call like what we might see on the reproduction market today as a Norman helmet. It'd be like typically with nasal guard. Not typically, but we often saw nasal guards. They were always affixed. We didn't have the adjustable ones at that time. You might see in some miniatures and some examples where it might have the forward kind of curve and tip, similar to what we would call like a Phrygian helmet. And that was typically worn along with like a male coif or just a male aventail. And that could be integrated or it could be separate. Typically an aventail was integrated into the helmet itself, while a coif was worn underneath. As far as coifs go, they did seem to come down and just hug the face, but I didn't see anything that would show that we had any that covered the face. We do see that in some later stuff, but during the Abassid time, we didn't really see that too often. It looks like mostly the reason for the coif was to protect the throat and the upper chest. It would create a second layer of mail to protect basically your heart, your lungs, you know, because a second layer of mail is almost as good as having like a plate mail. So yeah, that's really about it when it comes to armor of the Abbasid Caliphate. One small note: shields. Shields were a thing. Almost everyone used shields. Two types. You know, there's basically kind of two that I could find, and that was they used either a wicker shield. Wicker shields were in use. I mean, the Persian immortals in the Hellenistic era were using wicker shields, and they had wicker shields persisted all the way up until the Ottomans with the Kalkins, right? And then we also had the steel or iron separ, so a more small shield, similar to a buckler, and they were typically strapped in such a way that you could either use it kind of laying flat against your against like your forearm, your hand, or you could hold it out where it'd be like this, and you could easily just switch your grip to do that. So yeah, that's it for the armor. Another interesting note is if you're wanting to make an Abassid era kind of kit, if you want to look the part, essentially, black is shorthand for the Abbasid Caliphate. It was the official color of their standard. It was what all the court officials had to wear for any kind of official dealings or ceremonial proceedings, things like that. So wear a lot of black. Look, you know, like a medieval Islamic kit, Johnny Cash, and you got it made. That's it. Have a great day, guys.